All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of learning. Like, how do you learn best? That kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're going to be talking about metacognition,
Yes.
which is basically like how aware you are of how well you're understanding something right now. Like as you're learning it and how well you think you're going to remember it later.
Right.
And tying that to practice testing, which surprisingly can be a super powerful study tool.
Yeah.
So you shared with us this review.
Yes.
It's called Metacognition about practice testing, a review of learners' beliefs, monitoring, and control of test-enhanced learning by Michelle L. Rivers.
It's a great one.
Yeah, and this is really kind of your shortcut to understanding the science behind how you learn, and even more importantly, how you can learn better.
Right. Yeah. Because this isn't just about theory, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We want to give you actionable strategies that you can actually use to become, a more efficient learner.
Exactly. So we're taking all this academic jargon and cutting through it
Yeah.
to get to the core pieces so you can apply them to your own learning.
Yeah. And, in this review, there's 3 key areas that they focus on, like what you believe about how learning works,
Right.
how well you actually track your own learning, and then how you use that to control and manage your study habits.
Yeah.
And all of that, is going to be discussed, using practice testing.
Perfect. Okay, so let's jump in with something that, may make you rethink how you're studying right now.
Okay.
So the research shows that a lot of us, unless we've been trained specifically, we don't realize how powerful practice testing
Yeah.
is for long-term memory.
Right.
So we often lean on things that feel more productive, at least at the time.
Yeah, they feel good, right?
Rereading notes, highlighting,
Right.
rewriting things.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. This review mentioned some surveys that were done, and, they actually found that learners rated these less effective methods as more helpful than testing.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, how can that be? Right.
Mhm.
It's kind of weird.
It's very counterintuitive, yeah.
Yeah, and it points to a fundamental kind of misunderstanding about how memory works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you reread something passively, it can give you this sense of familiarity.
Right.
And you think, oh yeah, I know this, but it's kind of an illusion. But practice testing, right? Because you're having to actively pull that information out of your memory.
Yes.
It can feel harder. Right.
Yeah.
But that's actually what's making it stick. That effort of retrieval is what strengthens the connections over time. But then there's this other interesting thing that they discuss in the review. It's called conditional knowledge,
Okay.
right? So you might not even really understand when testing is effective or why it's effective.
Yeah. So, they highlight this study by McCabe from 2011, and it basically asks students, what are your learning strategy preferences?
Okay.
And the results were kind of surprising. Most students thought that those who just re-studied would actually learn more.
Right.
And only about 30% actually correctly identified testing as a better method.
Wow. Okay, so only 30%. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And that really shows, how ingrained these, maybe less effective habits are for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But the review also mentions an interesting kind of contrast, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It says that in fields like medicine, students seem to be much more aware of, the benefits of testing.
Right.
So there's these studies, Beer et al. In
Yep.
2020 and Pisa et al. In 2019, and they found that most medical students actually did recognize that testing was more valuable than just rereading. What do you think's going on there? Why is there that difference?
Yeah. It's an interesting point, and the review, gives a couple of possible explanations. One is, medical schools use a lot of problem-based learning, right?
Okay.
Which is all about applying your knowledge. So that might be leading students to actually value those more active learning techniques.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Right, like practice testing, right, where you have to
Yeah.
actually use the information. But it could also be, that medical students as a whole are just, already very motivated,
Yeah.
they're strategic learners, who knows? But it's interesting, right? It shows that when the learning environment really encourages active recall, then those beliefs about testing can actually change.
It's really interesting to see, how that environment shapes how we learn.
Yeah.
So, okay, maybe we don't fully get how much testing helps us remember in the long term, but do we at least see its value in other ways? The review kind of touches on how we use testing to monitor our understanding.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a really important distinction there. You might not think that testing is the best way to learn something.
Yeah.
Right. But you probably do understand that it helps you figure out, like, where those knowledge gaps are.
Yes.
Right. You know, Table 3 in the review summarizes 10 different studies, and they looked at, like, why students quiz themselves, and on average, only about 26% said it was because they thought it was a better learning method
Right.
than rereading. But a lot more, more than double that, actually, like 52% on average, said that they used it to check their understanding
Okay. Yeah.
and to figure out what they still needed to learn. So it's more like a diagnostic tool,
Right.
right?
Yeah, no, that definitely resonates. I feel like I've used practice quizzes more as a way to like see where I'm at rather than thinking about them as like, oh, this is how I'm going to learn this material.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, have we just been conditioned by our experiences with tests, especially in school, where they're often for grades,
Right.
to think about testing as like a judgment tool
Yeah.
rather than like, something that actually helps us learn?
Yeah, that's a really insightful point. I think the way testing is typically used in education probably plays a big role there.
Right.
If your main experience with a test is like high stakes evaluation, right? It makes sense that you'd see it more for monitoring than, for its potential to actually help you strengthen your memory.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about, what we believe about testing. Now let's get into the second part, which is like, how well do we monitor our own learning?
Right.
Our metacognitive monitoring. Like, how accurate are you at knowing what you actually know?
Yeah, I think that's huge. Like, accurate monitoring is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's what drives all your study decisions, right?
Right.
If you're off on what you think you know, then, you're going to make less effective choices about, like, where to focus your time. And the review talks about aggregate judgments of learning. Those are called JOLs.
Yep.
Right. And that's basically, like, your predictions about how much you'll remember from a certain amount of material. And the thing is, a lot of times when people predict how well they'll recall something, they've either tested themselves on it or just reread it.
Right.
They often don't get that the tested material actually leads to much better long-term retention.
It's so wild. Like, they don't see it coming.
I know, right? It's crazy.
And they talk about a study from 2013. It's by Tullis, Carol.
Okay.
And they did all these experiments where people were tested 2 days after they learned the material.
Yeah.
And they found that people remembered way more
Yeah.
of what they had like practiced with recall testing compared to just restudying.
Yeah.
But their predictions
Yeah.
for both methods were very similar.
Right.
And sometimes they even thought they'd remember the restudied stuff better.
I know, right? There's a total disconnect there.
It's such a disconnect.
Yeah.
And this is not just like a one-off finding, right?
No.
They're saying similar things have been found over and over again.
Yeah.
Different materials, different length of text,
Yeah.
even when learners got feedback.
Yeah.
It's just this ease of restudying
Yeah.
that's so deceptive.
It feels good, but it doesn't mean you're going to remember it later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The review also briefly mentions post-dictions, which is, the judgments we make after we take a test.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Are those any more accurate, when it comes to understanding the benefits of testing versus just rereading?
The research on post-dictions is kind of mixed.
Okay.
Some studies suggest that, like, after a test, your judgment about what you learned does get better.
Okay.
But when it comes to actually recognizing that the testing helped you more than restudying, it's not as clear.
Okay.
So, for example, there's a study by Lepowski et al. In 2014, they looked at younger students.
Okay.
And it seems like, the older elementary school students were better at, like, seeing the benefit of those test restudy cycles
Okay.
compared to the younger ones. So more research needed there for sure.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot we don't know still.
Yeah.
But what if we kind of zoom in, right? And we focus on like individual pieces of information? Can we be more accurate in predicting whether we'll remember a specific fact
Okay.
that we tested ourselves on versus one that we just reread?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, good.
So the review highlights that you can be more accurate in your predictions, but it's all about the context.
Okay.
Right. So if the way you're making your prediction matches the way you'll actually be tested later.
Oh, okay.
So, like, for example, in one of those Tullis et al. Experiments, when people tried to recall an answer, right, given a cue,
Mhm.
and then predicted if they'd remember it, their predictions were much more accurate than if
Okay.
they had just seen the cue and the answer together.
So if I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to remember something for a recall test, I should actually try and recall it first
Exactly.
and then see how confident I feel.
Yes, because the act of actually trying to retrieve the information gives you a more realistic sense of how strong that memory really is.
Okay.
And I think this raises like a crucial point, right, for everybody listening.
Yeah.
Like, think about the ways that you're currently checking your understanding.
Yeah.
Do they actually align with how you'll need to use that information later? Because if you're just rereading and feeling familiar, that might not be a good indicator that you'll be able to recall it or apply it when it matters.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Okay, so let's get into the third area, which is how learners actually control testing.
Right.
In their own study habits.
Yeah, so this is where we take all this theory, right, and put it into practice.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about how if you don't believe that testing is effective,
Right.
you're just not going to use it. So they looked at like survey data on how students say they study.
Okay.
And rereading is just a huge, it comes out on top as the most common strategy, often as the primary method. But practice testing, that's all over the place.
Right. Yeah, I remember seeing that in Table 4. Rereading is like the go-to for so many people.
It is, yeah.
But the review also pointed out something from Tullis and Maddox's research in 2020. And they found that how often people reported using practice testing actually changed.
Oh, really?
Based on how the question was asked.
Interesting.
So when students were just asked openly, what are your study methods?
Okay.
Fewer of them actually mentioned practice testing.
Oh, wow.
But when they were given like a list of strategies and asked to check off the ones they used,
right,
then more people said they did practice testing.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe self-testing isn't something that people readily think of as a distinct study strategy.
Right, like it's not on their radar.
Right, or maybe they just lump it in with, studying more broadly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a good reminder that what people say they do isn't always, what they actually do.
Right, for sure.
Right, or how well they're actually doing it. So then what does, experimental research tell us about when learners choose to test themselves in more, controlled settings?
So a few things come out of that. The perceived difficulty of the material is a big one.
Okay.
So learners tend to test themselves more on things they think are easier.
Yeah, okay.
And they'll switch to restudying when the material feels harder. But what's interesting, and there's the study from 2018 by Tullis et al.
Okay.
They found that focusing your testing on the stuff you already know can actually be a pretty good strategy.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Because it might help you really solidify that knowledge base.
Right.
And it also goes back to that idea of monitoring, right? We're using testing to just confirm what we already know.
Right. So it probably also feels a lot better.
Yeah, for sure.
To test yourself on something that you think you're probably going to get right.
Exactly, yeah.
What else affects when we choose to test ourselves?
Well, time is a big one, right? The amount of time between when you study something and when you test yourself. So shorter gaps, when the information is still fresh, you're more likely to go for testing.
Okay.
And that's probably because, you have a better chance of actually remembering it.
Right, yeah.
And then feedback, right? Whether or not you get feedback during the testing, that's a huge motivator.
All right, yeah.
Learners are way more likely to test themselves when they get feedback because it helps correct mistakes.
Yeah.
And it reinforces, what they've learned.
Feedback is so important, makes it so much more valuable.
It does.
And then the last thing is the stage of learning, right?
Right, yeah.
So they found that testing is more common later in the learning process.
Okay.
After you've done some initial study and review. But restudying is more favored at the beginning. So again, it seems like we're oddly using testing to check our progress.
Yeah.
Rather than as the main method to actually learn something.
Yeah, exactly.
So we like to test ourselves when we think we'll do well, when it's recent, when we get feedback, and after we've studied a bit already.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're always trying to set ourselves up for success. And maybe because of that, we're not really using testing to its full potential.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's limiting the potential.
Yeah, especially when it comes to tougher material.
Right, exactly.
What about how we actually test ourselves? Does the research show any common patterns there?
Yeah, there's definitely some patterns, and this is another area where we tend to fall short. There's this thing called the one and done strategy.
Okay.
So people will stop testing themselves after they get something right, once or twice.
Really?
But the research shows that repeated successful retrieval, especially when it's spaced out over time is much, much better for remembering things long term.
So even if I get something right on a practice quiz,
Yeah,
I shouldn't just be like, okay, I'm good.
exactly. Yeah.
I should keep testing myself on it.
You should keep testing, keep practicing, because each time you pull it out of your memory,
Right.
it's like you're strengthening that connection. And I think this study is fascinating. It's by Dunlosky and Rawson in 2015.
Yeah.
And they found that this habit of stopping early, it's really hard to break.
Wow.
Even when they tell people like, hey, if you keep testing yourself, you're going to remember it better.
Oh.
And even when they gave them rewards for doing better, it was still hard to get them to keep practicing.
It's so interesting. Like, why do we have that tendency to stop so early?
Well, I think it goes back to, seeing testing as a way to check what we know, right?
Yeah.
If you successfully retrieved it, you think, okay, I got it,
Right.
And you move on. It's efficient in the short term,
Yeah.
but you're missing out on that long-term benefit.
Right. There's a study, Jane's et al. In 2018, and they looked at like learning over multiple sessions. And they found that repeated retrieval does happen, but it's almost like a byproduct of testing, just to monitor progress across those sessions.
Interesting. So you're getting it, without even realizing it.
So even if I'm just like testing myself once per session to see how I'm doing,
Right.
I might still end up getting some of that repeated retrieval without even really aiming for it.
Right. Yeah, it's like a hidden benefit.
Okay.
I think what this means is that just incorporating self-testing into your routine, even if your goal is monitoring, you're still going to get some longer-term benefits.
Okay.
But if you really want to maximize it, right, you got to be intentional about it. You got to aim for that repeated retrieval
Okay.
and space it out over time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So to kind of wrap things up here, it sounds like practice testing can be a really powerful way to learn and remember stuff.
It is.
But how much we actually benefit from it depends on our beliefs about it.
Yeah.
How accurately we, assess whether it's working
Yeah.
and how we actually use it, when we're in control of our study habits.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary. Your beliefs can hold you back from using testing in the first place.
Right.
If you don't think it's going to work, why do it?
Exactly.
And then inaccurate monitoring, well, you're just going to make bad choices about how you study. And even if you do test yourself,
like your own study habits,
It is.
Are we focusing so much on like feeling like we understand something
Yeah.
that we're missing out on the actual effort of retrieving the information?
Yeah.
The thing that actually makes it stick.
You're right. It's like we want the easy road,
Yeah.
but we're missing out on like the deeper learning.
Understanding this whole metacognition thing.
Yeah.
It really feels like a shortcut to being well-informed.
Yeah.
Not just familiar with the material.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that, you got to try new things.
Yeah.
Experiment. Try incorporating more active recall, more self-testing, even if it feels hard.
Yeah.
That struggle, right, that you feel at the beginning when you're trying to retrieve something, that's a sign that you're actually learning.
That's so true. Well, this has been a great deep dive
It has.
into how we learn and how we can do it better with practice testing.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, hopefully it gives our listeners some things to think about, maybe experiment with their own learning a little bit. If you have any other thoughts or questions about this or how to, actually apply these ideas,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.